we have saved a good one for you, and appreciate you tuning in during what is also the last week of classes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's gone fast. Today, our chapter has the privilege of hosting Professor Josh Blackmon of the South Texas College of Law, Houston. Professor Blackmon is a national thought leader on constitutional law and the Supreme Court, has testified before Congress, advises state and federal lawmakers, and you may also recognize him from his regular appearances on NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, BBC, or NPR. Professor Blackmon is also an adjunct scholar at Cato Institute and was selected by Forbes magazine for 30 Under 30 in law and policy. Finally, I must also personally endorse the New York Times bestseller book, An Introduction to Constitutional Law.
Thank you.
If you're lucky, you might even run into Professor Blackmon somewhere and be able to get a signed copy like I have. But without further ado, I will now turn it over to Professor Blackmon, who will discuss how efforts to regulate and even ban 3D printed guns must satisfy constitutional scrutiny under both the Second and the First Amendment.
Well, Heather, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been to American almost every year in the past. It's sad that I can't be there with you this year, but hopefully we'll be able to be together in person soon enough when we're allowed to. And just to correct, it wasn't New York Times bestselling; it was bestselling on Amazon, which is not the same thing. But I will gladly take whatever credit I can get. So we have a treat for you today. We have not one, but two constitutional rights. We'll be talking about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and 3D printed guns. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I often litigate 3D printed gun cases. I've been involved with this litigation for nearly 7 years. It's been an ongoing issue. So to begin, 3D printing is a fairly significant technology. It lets you design an object on a screen and then convert that object into a real life design. You can 3D print a car. You can 3D print an entire house. And the way you 3D print is actually fairly straightforward. You tell a computer the size and the shape of a given object. So let's say you want to make a cylinder, right? Basically this tube. You tell the computer you want a cylinder with a height of 20 and a radius of 5. Remember your high school geometry. The area of a cylinder is pi r squared times height. So if you tell it height of 20, radius of 5, you can design with some accuracy a cylinder. Now this technology lets you make little trinkets and little devices, but we're not here to talk about cylinders or trinkets or cars. We want to talk about some cooler things. This is a 3D printer making a race car. You can make models of the human anatomy. And the technology is actually fairly straightforward. I often compare making a 3D printed device to making a candle, right? How do you make a candle? You take the wick and you dip it into the wax, you dip into the wax, you dip into the wax. 3D printing works in much the same way. But instead of dipping wax, you spray a very thin layer of plastic. You spray one layer of plastic, a second layer of plastic, a third layer of plastic, and a fourth layer of plastic. And you can make a ball, for example. If you look at it from a different perspective, you can see the heated bed, and you're basically putting plastic on top of this heated bed. And that's how 3D printing operates. All right, now I want to try something. I'm going to be showing you slides of an object being 3D printed. When you actually see what's being printed, I want you to put it into the chat, okay? You'll see it in a minute, but whoever sees it first gets a fake prize because I can't actually give you a real prize. If we were in person, I'd give you a free sandwich, but I can't even do that. Okay? Ready? So 1, this is the first slide. You can see this little honeycomb lattice. 2, 3, 4. Anyone see it? 5. Anyone see it yet? 6. See it? No? 7. Still no? 8. Oh, come on. At this point, you have to see it. You don't see it yet? 9. Frog. Very close. You're on the right track. Let's try one more. 10. Come on. Now you have to see 11. Yoda. Thank you, Ava. Okay, very good. It's Yoda from Star Wars, okay? 12, 13, there it is. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, done. Now, you were able to create a full object in the span of a few minutes. Now, I don't have much artistic skill, but I would be able to create this design in a computer and print it out. Right? If you gave me a block of clay or a piece of wood or maybe a piece of stone, I could not sculpt this. I could not mold this. I could not chisel this. But I could print it. 3D printing lets you establish some pretty sophisticated objects. Even a gun. And that's why I am invited to talk to you all about this topic today. Does the Constitution protect a right to 3D printed guns? Okay. The first 3D printed gun was called the Liberator. The person who developed this was actually a law student. His name was Cody Wilson, who I have now had the honor of working for almost 7 years. We were involved in litigation across the map. Now, what is this? This is probably the most important part of the Liberator. What's called the barrel of the gun. What's a barrel? A barrel is the sort of cylinder that the bullet fires out of, right? When you pull the trigger, the bullet goes flying, and it goes through this tube. This tube must be able to withstand a lot of heat and a lot of pressure because of bullets flying out of it. Cody's invention was to make a cylinder out of plastic that could withstand that sort of force. Now, earlier in this presentation, I showed you the code to 3D print a cylinder. Little did I tell you that that was actually the way to 3D print a gun barrel. Yes, the simple design of a cylinder is in fact the design for the barrel of a gun. Cody developed other parts of a gun. For example, this is the lower receiver of an AR-15. This is the guts that make an AR-15 work. Actually, President Biden's looking to ban these as we speak. The so-called ghost guns. Still legal as of now, but we'll see what happens in the next month or so. Cody also developed the 3D printed magazine. That is the container that holds the bullets in a gun. But this is what put Cody on the map. What the heck is this, Josh? These are the parts needed to make a fully functional plastic handgun. The blue thing in the upper left-hand corner is the handle. The little circly, squiggly things are the springs. The round thing towards the bottom is the cylinder that the bullet comes out of. The sort of triangular shaped object on the left, that's the frame, the receiver that holds all the parts together. The entirety of this device is made out of plastic, with the exception of two things. One, the bullet, right? The little little brass thing you see. The bullet's made out of metal that will trigger metal detector. And also a simple household nail, which is the left of the bullet, right? The nail is used as what's called a firing pin. I'm in DC now, so I assume you've never fired a gun. It's true for Northeast schools. A firing pin is a sharp object that pierces the back of the bullet. And when you puncture the back of the bullet, it makes it go kaboom, and the bullet flies out. Right? That's how a bullet works, right? There's gunpowder and there's a charge. If you strike it with enough velocity, it makes it go pow, and the bullet comes flying out. So the entire gun is plastic with the exception of the bullet and the firing pin. This is what the Liberator looks like fully assembled. It's not a very pretty gun. It's not a very efficient gun. It's also not very effective. It fires one bullet at a time. It's not really accurate. There's no rifling on the barrel. You can't really aim it well. And every time you fire it, you have to reload it. You will also notice on the floor there's a piece of rope, a yellow rope. You see that? Why is there a yellow rope on the floor? Because the gun's also not very safe. Why is the gun not very safe? Plastic is a terrible way of making a gun. Why? Plastic has unique qualities that you probably know very well. When plastic gets very hot, it melts. If you ever leave, a toy in the sun, it actually gets a little melty. When plastic gets very cold, it cracks and it's brittle. If you ever made plastic in the snow, you see that happening. The very nature of a gun is it goes from hot to cold very quickly. A gun's at room temperature, you fire it, it heats up real quick, and it gets cold real quick. Plastic is very likely to crack. And when plastic cracks, it breaks. When plastic melts, it breaks. So think about this. You're holding a gun in your hand that might crack or melt every time you pull the trigger. Not safe. The reason why the yellow rope is there is that Cody was able to use the rope to test it. He would tie the rope to the trigger and stand several feet away. Right? You wouldn't want to put this in your hand as a test run because then you'll lose some fingers. But eventually Cody perfected the process. He was able to treat the gun with certain types of chemicals to prevent it from exploding in his hand. Still not very useful, right? Because it only goes through a few shots before it breaks. These are not good guns. People always ask, "Oh, Josh, won't the technology get better?" I always get that question. I've been giving this talk now for about 7 or 8 years. Hasn't gotten better. Plastic sucks. It's not meant to have explosions inside of it. No matter how good the plastic is, it's still not going to be very useful, right? So this was not a very useful way of making a weapon. It's not very efficient, not very effective. But people are still afraid of it because I think they're just afraid of the idea of a plastic gun in general. Okay. This is what it looks like fully assembled with the blue handle. Now, is there a problem, right? Is there a problem with this device? When I often speak about 3D printed guns, this is what people have in mind, right? Where you go to a printer, you click print, and a fully functional gun pops out, which is simply not accurate. People have been making homemade guns for a very long time. They make what are called zip guns. What's a zip gun? A zip gun is a gun you can make from homemade parts. So this is one design I found on the internet. It combines a soldering iron, which is the black part, with a garden hose, which is the silver, which is the bronze part, right? So if you can weld a garden hose nozzle onto a soldering gun, you can make a fully functional pistol. And by the way, this one actually works because it's made of metal. It won't blow up in your hand. I found this design on the internet. Never look on the internet. They hollowed out a keychain flashlight and made a gun out of it. You've seen these. You see these all the time, like a keychain flashlight, and you make it into a pistol. One shot. That's all you need. Sorry, bad song. All right, but it's a one-shot pistol. All right, now I'm going to show you a demonstration where you should not try at home. All right, these guys are idiots, but they're going to show you how to make a gun out of a rubber pipe and a rubber tube and a metal pipe. So you see, in one hand he has his rubber tube, in the other hand he has a red shotgun shell and a metal pipe. And they're recording this in a flip phone camera, which you probably never even seen before, but they existed at a time in the past. At the tip of this metal pipe is this little dimple, this sharp dimple, which is what they'll use for a firing pin. Okay, so they load the shotgun shell into the rubber tube, and they're going to jam the metal pipe into the shotgun shell, right? They're going to go like this, boom. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Look where he's firing. He's firing into a cardboard box indoors. And look what's behind the cardboard box. Do you see that black and yellow cable? He's shooting into an electrical outlet. There are other boxes. There are holes in the box where he's done this before. These guys are idiots. Total idiots. So ready? You can see it here much clearly. There are electrical wires coming out, plugged into a fan right behind the box we're shooting into. Ready? So he's going to jam it in. 1, 2, 3, boom. They have just made a fully functional firearm with about $5 of parts. You go to Home Depot, you buy a rubber tube, and you buy a metal pipe, and you now have a shotgun. Remarkable, right? But simple. A hell of a lot easier than building a plastic gun, which can take 40 hours of work and thousands of dollars of equipment. And look how proud they are. They have this little shotgun shell. It's smoking. But it's very simple. Now, do these guys break any laws? Well, as of today, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearm has said the answer is no. Although Attorney General Garland seems to want to change that rule. As of today, the answer is that these actions are lawful. You can make your own handmade gun. You can't sell them, but you can make them. Again, all this may change very soon, so I might have to update my presentation, but this is the law as of today. So now let's get to the constitutional analysis. This case implicates both the First and the Second Amendment. The First Amendment has long been understood to prevent the government from censoring you. The government cannot impose what's called a prior restraint of speech, even if that speech may lead to some sort of dangerous outcomes. And this doctrine applies even where your speech is risky. And perhaps a great example of this dynamic is the Anarchist Cookbook. This is a cookbook that teaches you to be a terrorist, right? It teaches you to be a terrorist. How to make bombs, how to make poisons, how to do lots of bad things. Okay? But we have to keep in mind another factor. Information is speech. The mere fact that we're speaking in code does not deprive our communications of free speech protections. The courts have held that even if you're speaking in zeros and ones, you still have First Amendment rights. The court held in a case called Sorrell v. IMS Health that the creation and dissemination of information are speech. And again, it's two elements, creation and dissemination. These are two elements and not just one. Right? We live in a world governed by information, and the information, like the Matrix, is subject to the First Amendment. We also have the Second Amendment, which, to be frank, the Supreme Court has largely ignored, but we'll talk about it. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In a case called DC v. Heller, the court held that the Second Amendment protects an individual right that's not tied to militia service. And later, in a case called McDonald v. Chicago, the court held that the right to bear arms is incorporated as against the states. The court held that the DC handgun ban was unconstitutional, and so was the Chicago handgun ban. This is a photo of Heller and McDonald shaking hands. McDonald died a couple years ago. He was a great guy. Heller, as far as I know, is still around in DC. And the Second Amendment has a couple facets, which the court has not even considered discussing, but is worth talking about. One, I think, is the right to acquire arms, right? Pause for a minute and think, what if the government said, if you already have a gun, that's fine, you can keep it, but it's illegal to buy a new one? I think most people would agree under Heller that that sort of regime is unconstitutional. The Second Amendment has to have some basic right to obtain a firearm. In fact, the case in Heller himself was about getting a license to have a firearm. But I also think there's a more profound right, which is very relevant for this debate about ghost guns, which is a right to make arms. Long before there were sporting goods stores, people made their own weapons. Back in the time of the American Revolution, it was common for people to make their own guns and make their own ammunition. I think there's a deeply rooted right of making your own means of defending yourself, which is why this business of banning the ghost guns, I think, is problematic for a lot of reasons. But wait, there's more. In constitutional law, there's a concept known as a hybrid right, where one right reinforces a second right, the rights are enhanced. So, for example, if I said there's a law that makes it a crime to wish someone a Merry Christmas, an actual war on Christmas, that would violate both the freedom of speech and also the free exercise of religion. When two rights reinforce each other, they become stronger. And I think here we have, I think at this point we have a stronger right, because the First and Second Amendment reinforce each other, right? How so? The government is banning you from speaking about the Second Amendment, right? There are restrictions on bring code about how to use the right to bear arms. I think these rights do reinforce each other. Okay, so let's talk a bit about what laws are on the books now. We have the Undetectable Firearms Act. Okay, the Undetectable Firearms Act was passed in the 1980s. 1988, I think before most of you were born, if I had to guess. And the law says, I gotta move myself up. Oh, you know I could do that. I can go all around. Yeah. The law says that all guns must have a certain quantity of metal in them that would trigger a metal detector. Right? So a purely plastic gun would violate federal law. Okay. Why was this law passed in the 1980s if we're worried about plastic guns? Well, plastic guns aren't new. Indeed, there was a fear in the 80s of the Glock handgun. It was this new Austrian weapon that had some plastic parts in it. People said, oh my God, there's this plastic gun. It was actually made famous in one of the Die Hard movies. The Bruce Willis character, John McClane, said, luggage, that punk pulled a Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? It's a porcelain gun made in Germany. It doesn't show up on your airport X-ray machines, and it costs more than what you make in a month. Almost every aspect is true. It's not German, it's Austrian, it's not porcelain, it's made of metal with some plastic parts, and it will show up in an airport X-ray machine, and they're quite affordable. But people panicked because of movies, and they were afraid of this Glock handgun. All right, what about attempts to ban 3D printed guns? So no legislation so far. Senator Schumer tried to ban these many years ago, but his bill went nowhere in Congress. There have also been efforts to ban the materials used to 3D print a gun. But that doesn't really work, because guess what? You can 3D print metal. I actually went to a lab in Austin where they actually 3D printed a fully metal handgun. It was not cheap. It cost about $40,000, which is not a good use of money for a gun, but it can be done. This is what it looks like fully assembled metal 3D printed firearm. So the upshot is it's very hard to ban the manufacture of these devices. So how has the government gone after 3D printed guns? Export control, which you maybe have never been exposed to. There's a series of regulations called the ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, which limits sending arms to foreign nations, which I think makes sense, right? If I want to send Stinger missiles to Afghanistan, I should probably get the government's permission. If I want to send the blueprints for a classified nuclear submarine to China, I should probably get the government's permission. I think we would all agree that's a reasonable measure for national security. But for the last decade, the federal government has taken the position that putting code on the internet, open source code on the internet, is an export of arms. Now, I don't think it's a good reading of the statute. I also think it's unconstitutional. I don't think that this statute can be read to limit the sharing of public domain open source code that's in no way classified or anything like that. The government's tried using this argument to ban cryptography. I know this sounds archaic, but shipping a book with a CD-ROM in it with algorithms for cryptography, the government said was an export, and the courts were very skeptical here. So where are we now? Right, way back in 2013, almost 8 years ago, actually 8 years ago next week, the federal government told Cody Wilson that he has to take his files off the internet. He has to remove them immediately. These files used to make a gun. He complied. And for the last 8 years, it's truly been 8 years, we've been involved in litigation with the federal government. As of today, you can find these files on the internet. They're not hard to find. You can download them. You can use them. So all the efforts to try and stop them have been frankly unsuccessful. We are still fighting and litigating for a right to put these files online. But the courts move slowly. But I hope this presentation has shown you that there are some arguments why these restrictions on 3D printed guns are unconstitutional. All right. Thank you so much. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take your questions. Either you can raise your hand or go into the chat.
Thank you, Professor Blackmon, and thank you for the presentation and for showing us that our professors can in fact use the green screens if they want to.
It's okay. It works well.
So yeah, we'll take Q&A now. I believe you can both, as mentioned, drop your questions into the Q&A function. There's also a raised hand function. I think either would probably work. So feel free to do either if you have any questions.
I believe Ava has a question.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so my question is, there's been a lot of concern lately about 80% builds, and it ties into this because people are, worried that if blueprints for these guns, for example, or the documents required to download and 3D print are considered like part of the manufacturing process, then the design plans that you receive when you build an 80% gun that could set a precedent that would relate those two things. So what do you think about that, and where do you think that legislation is going to go as far as 80% builds?
Sure, and thanks, Ava, for the question. Let me give some background because not everyone knows what 80% is. For many years, people have been able to purchase kits through the mail and online to build a gun. And what are these kits? They're basically blocks of metal that are mostly finished, but not completely finished. And if a person does some work to it, drill some holes, make some cuts, whatever, right? It becomes a fully functional receiver for a gun. And they're called 80% because they're 80% finished. They're almost done, but just the end user has to finish them off. The reason why they do this is if a gun is less than 80%, then it doesn't have to be registered by the National Firearms Act, right? There's no requirement to have a serial number. There's no requirement to have a background check. People can buy these kits. And there are ways of making them that are easier on others, right? Some people have talent, some people don't. Some people like experimenting. Some people like trying different designs. Lots of people have different approaches to these 80% lowers. There have been speculation that the Biden administration is going to try to treat the 80% lowers as if they were fully functional firearms. They're in the process right now of making regulations that would accomplish that. So I know the question from Ava was about legislation. We don't pass legislation. We just have executive action. We just live in a world of executive diktat. So I don't think there'll be any bills. My tentative read is that the statute doesn't support that broad of a reading, right? The term firearm has some meaning, and it's not any block of metal, right? If they really think that's any block of metal that can be converted into a gun, they're gonna have a hard time defining it because I'm not sure where to draw the line. For decades, the ATF said 80% were okay, and now they're suddenly changing their position. And it's skeptical of why they're changing the position now. The courts have said if you change a long-standing position, you have to have a good reason why. I'm sure they'll make up something, but it'll be held up in the courts for years. The other part of your question is, what about design documents, right? What if, an 80% lower comes with a manual, a print manual, maybe a manual in PDF, right? It's in a thumb drive. Is that manual also a gun part? And truly, in our litigation, the courts have said, or at least one court said, that a design document could itself be a form of arms, which I think, again, is not consistent with the statute, but does run into First Amendment problems, right? Are you really going to start regulating the books used to manufacture gunsmithing, right? If an Olympic target shooter puts a manual on her Twitter account of how to tweak a gun to, make it more accurate, is that going to now be censored by the state? So really, I get what they're trying to do. I understand why they're pushing these directives. I think the way you have to is with legislation to start, and even then, it has to be very narrowly tailored to fit within the First Amendment. But good question.
Thank you.
Okay, what else? What other questions you have? Any questions from Heather, from the board?
You might have given us everything we need to know.
That's impressive.
Let me just check the chat and the Q&A box. Yeah, I mean, it looks like you might have. Oh, we have. I'm not sure if your hand is still up from before. If you might have another question, but
Yeah, I was just kind of asking another question / making a comment where people that tend to be more conservative or libertarian leaning have kind of talked about how speech is being seen as something that can be harmful or cause harm, and now it's funny that legally it's speech could literally become a weapon. So what do you think about that and the sort of cultural side of classifying speech as a literal weapon?
There's an old expression, the pen is mightier than the sword, right? For the longest time, it was understood that speech itself can be quite dangerous. Speech is always dangerous, right? If I give someone the blueprints or the code to make a nuclear bomb, that's pretty dangerous. If I publish, classified information like the Pentagon paper, that can be dangerous. People can always use information in ways that harm others, and I don't think that's necessarily new. I know Justice Kagan wrote about weaponizing the First Amendment, and I sort of chuckled when she said that because that's kind of what these litigations are about. But at bottom, I think the government needs to have a greater justification to shut down information put on the internet. If we're dealing with open source code that's in the public domain, I would not want to give the state the power to shut that down based on the fact it can be used to manufacture, manufacture these products. Thank you for the question. Okay, so Aaron asks in the chat, and I see Jack has another question in the Q&A. So I'll do Aaron's question first. What tailored regulations do you expect of the Biden administration in the coming days? Probably a couple things. One, they want to ban or at least prohibit so-called ghost guns, which is a phrase that doesn't really have a fixed meaning. People have been gunsmithing for 200 years. They make their guns at home. And historically, to make a gun at home, you don't need a serial number. It's not practical. Most people who are hobbyists don't have the time and effort to apply for licenses and go through the million hoops you need to become a gun manufacturer. And I think it'd be sad if the government tries to actually ban gunsmithing and ban making guns at home. It's very hard to define that activity. Historically, they've just not done it. They said, if you want to make your own gun, that's fine. You just can't sell it. The other possible case is banning what's called an arm brace, which you may not even know what this is, but it's basically an accessory you can put on a rifle that connects your arm to stabilize it and to make it a little more accurate. You may not know this, but actually firing a gun is very hard. You watch the movies and they go pow, 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 right? It's not like that. If you actually try and fire a weapon, there's a lot of kickback and your arm moves around. It's actually very hard to keep your arm steady if you have target practice or otherwise. So banning these arm braces, I think, is also going to be problematic. People have disabilities. They're actually a need for these devices. People who may not be able to stabilize a gun with one arm, they actually need it. So these are the two big things that President Biden asked his attorney general to look into. Again, there'll be litigation for years, so I don't think any of these regs will go into effect anytime soon. Jackie asked about gun safety legislation. So legislation means you have to go through Congress, which is, of course, a much more useful tool. We should have more legislation and less executive action. The sorts of bills have been around forever about expanding background checks. That might go through. I'm not sure. I think for the most part, people are consistently the people who use guns for ill are those who pass background checks. So I really don't have strong feelings. It's not going to make a huge difference, right? The guns used in these awful instances are generally purchased legally. I think there might have been one case where the person may have manufactured part of his gun a couple of years ago, but these are guns manufactured legally. So, I don't know that the background checks will have too much of a effect. They make people feel good. They sound good, but realistically, I don't know what they're actually going to do. In terms of actually banning entire classes of weapons, there are millions and millions of these guns floating around. I think it'd be very dangerous for the government to try to ban a gun that's very widely held like the AR. There was an attempt to ban the assault rifles in the mid-'90s that expired. I don't think there's going to be an appetite to do that again. Maybe they try and pass a ban on magazine size, which I've never really understood, right? If you have it's like at the airport, right? You can bring a 3.4 ounce bottle of liquid, but you can't bring 3.5 ounces, but you can have two 3.4 ounce bottles. Reloading is not very hard. So if you can just switch magazines, these are mostly efforts to make people feel good. And they're sort of like you're doing something, but I'm not convinced that it will accomplish what people want to accomplish. Sorry. All right. What other questions we have? Thank you, Jackie.
I have one question for you, Professor Hoffman.
Sure.
For those of us who want to stay tuned both with your legislation and kind of this area broadly, what would you say is the best way for us to kind of keep up? Should we follow your Twitter and follow that way?
Well, yeah, my Twitter is actually pretty good. It's at Josh and Blackmon. You can follow me here. Also, if you're not reading the Vala Conspiracy, it's a very good legal blog, which I would hope everyone follows. But yeah, just stay informed. I think there's definitely movement afoot. The Supreme Court also is refusing to take any sort of gun case. Oh, I put the wrong handle. I don't know my own handle. Josh M. Blackmon. I think I would know my own handle by now. I don't. But the court just does not want to take any gun cases, and that's sort of the world where we're looking in. Okay.
It actually brings me to another question I was wondering. We have noticed the Supreme Court erring on the side of not granting cert on Second Amendment cases. I'm wondering, now that we have a full 9, at least for now, if you expect, maybe now that we have a full 9, maybe with the addition of Justice Barrett, do you suspect in the coming years we will see a case that directly handles the Second Amendment?
Yeah, look, I'm actually kind of annoyed, right? I mean, you guys are now, 1 L's, your 2 L's, your 3 L's. For you, the Second Amendment's like this old hat, right? Heller is 13 years old. You were probably all in elementary school, middle school when Heller came out in 2008. I was a law student, and it was a huge deal. And in the 13 years since Heller, we've had 0 gun cases that actually mattered. The court has not taken anything. And even now, with a ostensible conservative majority, the court's still not taking any gun cases. So maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe they'll take gun cases later this month or in June. But their pack gives. I don't know what gives. There's stuff going on that I don't fully understand, and it makes me angry. Decide these cases, resolve the circuit splits, and let's move on with their lives. Don't keep this purgatory going on forever.
Thank you. Yeah, I think some of us can agree, and maybe even on some other topics as well.
Great.
And I think maybe with that might be all of our questions for you. Thank you again for everything, being comprehensive both in your presentation and with all of the Q&A.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope I can see you all on campus next year.
Yeah, no, you're certainly welcome to come back. We owe you a lunch or dinner on
I'm
us.
happy to do it. All right, guys,
Well,
take care.
Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you so much.